Hello. I've been talking about it for a while and I'm finally going to do it. We're going to talk about the Doomsday prophecy of the Cross of Hendaye. And before I jump in, there's a lot to jump into, but before I jump in, I want to acknowledge my sources. Primarily, I'll be using Fulcanelli's book, Mystery of the Cathedrals, originally written in French and then translated. Fulcanelli is a master alchemist, and if you don't know what that means, it's basically a philosopher, mathematician, and someone who hides what they're really doing so they can avoid being killed by the church. And then on top of that, I'll be taking information from a documentary by Jay Widener about the cyclical cross of Hendaye, and I will put a link to that as well as the cover of some of his research. And then lastly, there's just a few things, but this is an extremely useful book for anyone who wants to get into this stuff. It's not very long at all, and it's mostly symbols. But this is the Book of Symbols by Rudolf Koch, and we will be getting into that as well. So, let's start. So, until you actually dive into alchemy and hermeticism and that sort of thing, it really is one of those things that hides in plain sight. And Fulcanelli and this book dive into the symbolism that Masons and alchemists used in order to create beautiful works of art via architecture and simultaneously lace it with an entire language of symbols. And this entire book goes to dissect not only the actual structural anomalies that match up to alchemical thinking, but the symbols and the ways that the symbols that are placed out throughout European cathedrals specifically. We will maybe touch back on this sort of topic in a different video, but the reason that this is relevant for this is, although we're not talking about a cathedral, this is an entire book, an entire career, an entire lifetime of studying shared symbols throughout different buildings, throughout different religions, throughout different regions. And again, a lot of this is tying different symbols from different times and different beliefs into one to create one school of thought that is about bettering yourself and then bettering the world. And you can have herbal alchemy, you can have spiritual alchemy, you can have social alchemy, you can have business alchemy. Alchemy is taking a starting point or starting slab and then dissolving it, cooking it, making it better, transforming it with your hand and your knowledge into something that is greater than it was. So lead to gold, or weeds into elixirs and stuff like that. It's universal. So outside of St. Vincent's Cathedral in Hendaye, France, is a kind of odd-looking cross. It's about 12 feet tall. It has a 3-foot base with 4 faces on each side, rectangular base. It has a column, a 17-fluted column, and on top is about a 2-foot Greek cross with 2 inscriptions on it. The inscriptions on either side read as O Crux Aves Pes Unicus, and the other side reads INRI. There are multiple interpretations to both of these, so we will not dive into it just yet. On the faces of the base, we have the star, the moon, the sun, and a weird-looking circle with 4 A's into it. And again, dive into the symbols, we're just covering the basics right now. In Fulcanelli's book, this is like one of the last chapters, is actually added for the second publishing. And Widener, who's one of the researchers I looked at, suggests that this was intentional and suggests that Fulcanelli had one of his students add this chapter about the Cross of Hendaye in 1950s after his death because it was closer to the time of the predicted catastrophe. So the roots of this prophecy tie to Chaleism. Chaleism is a sect of Gnosticism, which is another one of these sort of secret doctrines. It's based off of Christianity, but has a lot more to do with nature. It's kind of like a pagan, hermetic version of Christianity, and a lot less hateful. And so this Chaleism is a sect of Gnosticism that primarily focuses on the end of the world and double cataclysms, kind of great flood sort of stuff. And the fact that there's even a sect of Gnostic teaching that deals just with the end of the world That is like layer on layer on layer of like birthday cake for me. It's just doom on top of truth. And so if we look at that belief, and now that we have Chileism tied in with Hermetic and alchemy, we have this new, like, that gives us sort of a foundation of what the symbols are that we can expect to see in this cross and in this interpretation of the cross. So let's talk about the base. The base has 4 faces, and the first we'll start with, and the reason we start with this is that it is on the east face of the cross. East is where the sun rises, so it is red as the beginning, and on the east face we have the star. It's an 8-pointed star, and much like the tarot deck, we have an 8-pointed star here, which symbolizes a new hope, kind of like a new beginning, faith in something that is yet to be seen. Next, we have the moon face, which is on the north face, and the moon card represents trials and tribulations that lead to the overcoming of illusion in one's own life. So sort of, oh man, life just threw me for a ringer, but what I thought of this is no longer what I think of this, and I've been able to like remove this idea. I've been able to realize that this is just something that isn't serving me or isn't real or isn't something that I need to shape my life around. And so we have the symbol of the moon overcoming. And then the sun, we have generally a symbol, and it has like the same, we have wiggly rays with pointy rays, but the difference obviously being that this one looks like it's angry, it looks like it's screaming, where the sun in the tarot deck is considered warmth and happiness in a new life sort of way. It can also mean literal warmth, and Falconelli will tie back to this angry sun, but we'll leave it in the tarot correlation for now. The next card in the tarot major arcana is the judgment card, and judgment in the deck does have a trumpet or an angel blowing a trumpet with a flag of this cross section of a circle in it. And what this represents, we will dive further into it in a little bit, but basically, as the fool that started the major arcana goes through a journey, whether it's you, whether it's an idea that needs to be tested and progressed, you are the fool, or something is the fool, and then as it makes the journey throughout the arcana, it develops, it learns, it meets people, it gets pushed down, it gets back up, and judgment is the final, like, you did it, like, look what you've done, look how you've progressed, look how you've changed, and now we're doing something different. It's this time has ended. This has come to a completion, and now it's time to go. So, judgment, when it comes to, like, Christian vernacular, it's about the rapture, it's about people being collected, and what did you do with your life sort of thing, but also points to Revelation, it points to doom, it points to the world ending. So those are the 4 faces, and another fun correlation with it is if we look at the tarot card numbers, we have, the star, moon, sun, and judgment. The star is card number 17, and then 18, 19, 20. And we have 17 flutes. Flutes are the indentation of the column. And there are 17 flutes on this column. And then hidden on the Greek cross, almost towards the top, are 2 X's overlaying each other, meaning 20. And 20 is the judgment card. So now that we have that sort of tarot correlation set up, let's keep going. So the first inscription that we're going to talk about on the cross is the one that says, O crux ave spes unica. It should say, O crux ave spes unicas. And in Latin, this phrase would mean, Hail, O cross, the only hope. However, Falconelli points out that the mistakes that are made are, like, way too intentional to be a mistake. Obviously, because of the finality and the skill used to carve this cross, there are no other mistakes anywhere except this one inscription. And if you're a Mason, and if you're a Mason using Hermetic symbolism or alchemical symbolism or Gnostic symbolism, you would know better than to, like, freehand an inscription on a cross. So you chalk them out, you draw them out, you do a draft, and this draft was purposely messed up. So if we take the phrase, O crux ave spes unicas, and then we take this letter and put it to another place where it doesn't belong, it changes the meaning, and Falconelli grabs onto that. Falconelli describes this mistake in detail, and I'm just going to read it because he says it better than I could. The masculine word pes in the nominative requires the adjective unicus, agreeing in gender, and not the feminine word of unica. It would, therefore, appear that the corruption of the word space, hope, into pes, foot, by dropping the initial consonant, must be the unintentional result of a complete lack of knowledge on the part of our stonecutter, which means it would be way too obvious to anyone who reads Latin, anyone who carves stone. This is not a simple mistake. It is legit. There's a reason that this mistake was made. But does inexperience really justify such uncouthness? I cannot think so. Indeed, a comparison with the other motifs carried out by the same hand and in the same manner shows evident care to reproduce the normal positioning, a care both shown in the placing and the balance of the motifs. Why should the inscription have been treated so much less scrupulously? A careful examination of the latter shows that the letters are clear, if not elegant, and do not overlap. No doubt our workmen traced them first in chalk or charcoal, and this rough draft must rule out any idea that a mistake occurred during the actual cutting of the letters. Falconelli also points out that there are two S's in this inscription that follow kind of the same weird thinking. Everything is carved nicely, nothing overlaps, there's room for everything, and everything is balanced, but for some reason, these two S's on this inscription are tilted. And Falconelli applies Hermetic thinking and alchemical thinking to give this description. Essentially, this tilted S can be replaced with or translated as the Greek symbol of chi, and it also shares this representation of the heliocoidal track. And if you have no idea what that means, it's because we don't really use it that much. Heliocoidal track is a shape that we on Earth perceive the sun to be making as we move through space, because we spin at an axis. Although we have the same orbit, it takes about 26,000 years for the axis to reach that certain point, and as we move through that cycle, because of the path that we have and the wobble of the axis, we have this illusion that the S creates a track. And so the relevance of this crooked S being a heliocoidal track is that this is the way that a lot of ancient civilizations would track cataclysms, like 2012, like Ice Age, like comets hitting, like stuff like that, because just like everything else, just like spring, fall, summer, winter, these things have cycles. These things have calendar events in which the Earth basically cleans humans off of it. Some of it's solar flare prophecies, some of it's another giant flood. But a lot of these religions have a precession of the equinox sort of story. And this one is that the world's gonna fucking end. So I'm circling back to mention that while Widener, about this inscription, points out that he thinks the S's are point to the path of the sun, while there's evidence to point to that, and while it is relevant to the prediction, and Falconelli touches on it as well, I think a more relevant interpretation of it is to look at both of the S's are tilted, and they are both round at the top. They both have a round, larger top than the rest of the letter. No other letter has it. Some of them have serifs, some of them are sharper, some of them are corners, but nothing has this, and both S's happen to be tilted and have a bulbous head like a snake's head. The reason that is so relevant is that I'm not going for the snake in the garden. What I'm going for is the caduceus wand of the Hermetic teachings. The caduceus wand is relevant in Egyptian studies, in Greek studies, in all this stuff. It's the tool, it's the staff of Hermes Trismegistus, Thoth, or like the Hermes of Greek, and he is the representative, he is the archetype, he is the god of communication, of enlightenment, of spreading of knowledge. So to have the two S's, the two S's represent the two snakes makes a lot more sense to me, tying it all together. It also can be tied to the Kundalini rising of purifying yourself, and then having the two ribbons of energy around your spine, which are also very often represented as snakes. The opposite cross has another inscription that says INRI. This is a common Christian phrase seen throughout symbolism and is most commonly translated to Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. In Latin, it is Jesus Nazarenus Rex Iudiorum, and INRI. There's another Latin phrase that this can translate to, which Falconelli grabs onto, and we are going to be using along with the King of the Jews phrase, is Igne Natura Renovata Integra. And what that means is, by fire, nature is renewed whole. And a Revelation and a lot of other religious doomsday prophecy, Falconelli adds to this alternative translation by saying, for it is by fire and in fire that our hemisphere will soon be tried. And just as, by means of fire, gold is separated from impure metals, so, Scripture says, the good will be separated from the wicked on the great day of judgment. Now that we've gone from bottom to top, we have to go back to the bottom and dive in now that we have a little more information under our belts. So let's go back to the face with the oval and the 4 A's. This is a pretty packed symbol. Not only have we tied it to the judgment card of the major arcana, on which Falconelli piles on more judgment, more doom, more revelation, more apocalypse, we can unload the symbol even more. In Hermeticism, in Freemasonry, in a lot of this stuff, the circle with the cross in it is already a diagram of the entire universe. It is form meeting space. It is masculine meeting feminine. It is with the circle and the square that you can discover all laws of mathematics and therefore all laws of nature. And if we go further, we have these 4 A's, and in each of the A's we have a 90-degree crossbar, very similar to the compass and the square, which is again another point to Hermeticism and Freemasonry. Now we can keep diving into it. So we have these 4 A's. There's a few different things that these A's represent. And if we continue to dive into the meaning of these A's in the quadrants, we can cut it up into the 4 ages that we know of, like a great season. We are most familiar with the Iron, Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age. These also correlate to the Yuga systems. It's the same amount of numbers, a little bit of a different breakdown, but if we were to correspond them, our Iron Age is the Kali Yuga, which is the shortest final chapter of the entire cycle of time. And next we have Bronze, which is the Dwapara Yuga, and then above that is the Silver Age, which is the Treta Yuga. If we were to correspond them, our Iron Age is the Kali Yuga, which is the shortest final chapter of the entire cycle of time. And next we have Bronze, which is the Dwapara Yuga, and then above that is the Silver Age, which is the Treta Yuga, and lastly the Gold, or the Krita Yuga. And the Krita Yuga is the longest. In biblical thinking, it's a lot about like the turmoil before the 10,000 years of peace. And so it's important that we find different cultures to tie this to, because it makes it not only more grounded, but a lot less bigoted almost. Like you can share symbols with people 500 years away and 5,000 miles away. It doesn't matter. And if we want to add yet another layer to this, if we take the zodiacal clock and we cut it into 4, that means we have 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock. We have those zodiacs being Aquarius at 12, we have Taurus at 3, Leo at 6, and Scorpio at 9. Very commonly, especially in Western world, the Scorpio is represented by an eagle, not by a scorpion. So I've mentioned a couple times, when we see the man, Aquarius, Taurus, the bull, Leo, the lion, and Scorpio, the eagle, that is the 4 evangelists, the 4 apostles. It's also the 4 beasts that come out when the final trumpet of Revelation is rung. It's the 4 beasts that mark the end of time. It's the 4 apostles, it's the 4 seasons, it's the 4 elements, it's 4 blah, 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 blah. These are that. And so we have yet another correlation. We have zodiacal ages tying into Kali Yuga, tying into the four Yuga system, tying into the four ages that we know of, and they all can be found to be tied to a circle with four A's and a cross in it. So it's again, it's a big old soup of symbols, and we have the tools now. So now we get to unlock all this crazy ass shit. The part of Revelation that talks about these four beasts reads as follows. And before the throne, writes St. John. St. John's a book of Revelation. He transcribes book of Revelation. There was a sea of glass, like unto crystal. And in the midst of the throne and round the throne were four beasts full of eyes, and before and behind, meaning they have eyes all over. Another common symbol in Renaissance art are beasts and angels with these beautiful wings covered in eyes. So that symbol. And the first beast was like a lion, and the second beast like a calf, and the third beast has the face of a man, and the fourth beast was like a flying eagle. And this also correlates to Ezekiel's symbol, or Ezekiel's vision when he gets brought up into the stars. And I looked, and behold, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was out about it, again, fire. And out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. And so while we have all of these layerings of the the zodiac, of the eagle being at the last quadrant, of the Kali Yuga being the last chunk before the end, of the Iron Age slowly giving way and breaking down to give way to a new Golden Age. This is where a lot of this stuff comes from. And Fulcanelli kind of closes up the chapter by giving this passage in which he says, "The Age of Iron has no other seal than that of death. Its hieroglyph is a skeleton, bearing the attributes of Saturn. The empty hourglass, symbol of time run out, and the scythe, reproduced in the figure 7, which is the number of transformation, destruction, and of annihilation." Yet another secret teaching that we get to tie into this is the language of gematria. And so if gematria is the science of assigning numerical values to characters, and is most tied to the Hebrew language. I want to do a whole video just on the Hebrew alphabet, because it is in itself more than a language of symbols. It is a language built within a language, and it blooms throughout the entire universe. It's so sick. But for now, let's just break down this one sort of inscription with what gematria would say about it. INRI would break down into Yod, which is 10, Resh, which is 50, Nun, which is 200, and Yod again, which is 10. This combines to be 270. Why is 270 relevant? 270 is relevant because it's the same point on the pie chart. Like if we were looking at the zodiac clock, 270 is the point in which Scorpio would begin. It is the last quadrant. It is the last section. And it just ties to one more thing, being the end of a cycle. So, well, we have the 270, it's the last quadrant before 360, the last quarter before it all ends. So let's do a quick rundown of some of the main symbols that we've covered in this cross. First, if we look at the tarot breakdown of 17, 18, 19, and 20, we have the star, the moon, the sun, and the judgment. The star, the moon, and the sun often relate to the father, mother, child, life, death, rebirth. And so right there we have an end of a cycle. We have something coming to completion, and then lastly, a judgment card, which is everything ending. And it is not the final card of the Arcana, the world is, but the world represents everything. It's everything. And so while something comes to an end, you still have all the material that was in something, and that is what the world is. It's the world before the next creation is made. So just on the bottom, we have cycles, we have doom, we have the diagram of the universe, and the dissection of the four ages, which ties to the four yugas, which ties to the four clock sections in the zodiac, all of which point to us entering the last chapter of chapters. As we go up, we have the 17 flutes, which points to the 17 of the tarot, and then on top of that, we have the cross with the very unusual sort of pictogram puzzle, and then INRI just adding to the symbolism, adding the gematria, adding different influences from different people, from different places, from different times, all coming together to send one message of we are in the last chapter before doom and the end. So this is basically where we're gonna wrap up, but there's a whole nother chapter on this that Widener goes into. I'm not gonna dive into it because it's a lot more work for his own personal theory that the place that this cross actually has another word puzzle within it, which points to a destination where they'll be safe from doom. If you are into that, I highly recommend looking into the documentary, but it's a lot of just puzzles and wordplay, and sort of is a side trek from this actual cross. I said I would circle back to what it meant by the inscription having the word foot instead of hope. This is definitely something that Widener goes into much deeper than I do. And I'm not gonna touch it. He finds more clues that suggest different riddles of locations in which will be okay during this cataclysm. And so his gatherings of it is he used that inscription to get different clues, and then he breaks it down mathematically to find actual coordinates. And these coordinates do correlate to significant locations on Earth in which geomagnetic grids meet and high strangeness occurs there. So that's what that foot means, is like we must walk, we must travel, we must find these places that will be safe. But I'm not going to touch that. So that's what the foot is. And the last thing before I go, this is a passage from Fulcanelli's book, and it's pretty much how he ends it. I find it very interesting, and this is basically going to be like a kind of love-hate sort of thing. If you find this stuff interesting, then there's worlds upon worlds to check out. And if you're not, then I totally get why. It's something. But I like this passage a lot, and I think it lends itself to this study quite well. No one may aspire to possess the great secret if he does not direct his life in accordance with the researches he has undertaken. It is not enough to be studious, active, and persevering if one has no firm principles, no solid basis, if a moderate enthusiasm blinds one to reason, if pride overrules judgment, and if greed expands before the prospect of a golden future. The mysterious science requires great precision, accuracy, and perspicacity in observing facts, a healthy, logical, and reflective mind, a lively but not overexcitable imagination, a warm and pure heart. It also demands the greatest simplicity and complete indifference with regards to theories, systems, and hypotheses which are generally accepted without question on the testimony of books of the reputation of their authors. It requires its candidates to learn to think more with their own brains and less with those of others. And finally, it insists that they should check the truth of its principles, the knowledge of its doctrine, and the practice of its operations, find nature, the mother of us all.